What happens when one of Hollywood's most private actors sits down for what should be a routine chat show appearance, only to find himself facing a host who seems determined to tear him down? In just 40 seconds, a single invasive comment would transform a friendly interview into an explosive confrontation that ended with Tom Hardy walking off set, leaving the Loose Women panel in complete shock. It was supposed to be a simple interview. Tom Hardy, the celebrated actor known for his intense roles and even more intense privacy, had agreed to appear on Loose Women to discuss his latest film project. The atmosphere in the studio seemed relaxed as he walked onto the set, greeted by applause from the audience. He took his seat across from the panel, which included Denise Welch, Ruth Langsford, Colleen Nolan, and Janet Street Porter. The lights were bright, the cameras were rolling, and everything seemed perfectly normal. But from the very first question, something felt off. Denise Welch, sitting in the center of the panel, leaned forward with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She opened with what seemed like a standard question about his new movie, but there was an edge to her voice, a sharpness that suggested she had something else in mind. "Tom, darling, welcome to the show," Denise began, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Now, we're all very excited about your new film, but what I really want to know is, why are you always so serious? You never seem to smile in interviews. Is it because you think you're too good for shows like ours?" The audience went quiet. Ruth and Colleen exchanged uncomfortable glances. Tom paused, clearly taken aback by the confrontational opening. "I'm not sure I understand the question," Tom replied calmly, maintaining his composure. "I'm here to talk about the film, and I'm happy to be here. I take my work seriously, but that doesn't mean I think I'm above anyone." Denise laughed, but it wasn't a warm laugh. It was mocking, dismissive. "Oh, come on, Tom. We've all seen your interviews. You barely give anything away. You act like every question is an interrogation. Are we really that scary?" Ruth tried to intervene, sensing the tension building. "Denise, I think what Tom is saying is that he's a private person, which is absolutely fine. Tom, tell us about the film. What drew you to this role?" Tom nodded gratefully at Ruth and began to answer. "Well, the character is someone who's dealing with a lot of internal conflict, and I found that really interesting, because..." But Denise cut him off. "Internal conflict, yes, we get it. You love those brooding dark roles. But what about you, Tom? What about your personal life? You never talk about that, do you? Is it because there's something you're hiding?" The studio fell silent again. Janet Street Porter shifted in her seat, looking uncomfortable. Colleen looked down at her notes. Tom's jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his voice steady. With the "Respect, Denise. I'm here to talk about my work, not my personal life. I've always kept those things separate, and I think that's a reasonable boundary." Denise scoffed. "Boundaries? You're a public figure, Tom. You don't get to pick and choose what people ask you about. If you can't handle a few simple questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews at all." Ruth jumped in again, her voice firmer this time. "Denise, I think we should respect Tom's boundaries. He's been nothing but professional since he sat down. Tom, I'm sorry about this. Let's talk about your preparation for the role. What kind of research did you do?" Tom took a breath, clearly trying to move past the awkwardness. "Thank you, Ruth. The research was quite extensive, actually. I spent time with..." Once again, Denise interrupted. "Oh, here we go with the method acting routine. You actors and your research. Do you really think you're that special, Tom? Do you think spending a few weeks pretending to be someone else makes you some kind of hero?" Colleen finally spoke up, her voice gentle but concerned. "Denise, that's a bit harsh, don't you think? Tom is just trying to answer our questions." Denise waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, please, Colleen. Don't tell me you're impressed by all this mysterious, brooding nonsense. He comes on our show, refuses to answer basic questions, and we're supposed to just sit here and praise him? I don't think so." Tom's expression had changed now. The patience was wearing thin. "Denise, I came here as a guest on your show. I've been respectful. I've tried to answer your questions about my work, which is what I was told this interview would be about. But you seem more interested in attacking me than having an actual conversation. Denise leaned back in her chair with a smug smile. Attacking you? Don't be so dramatic, Tom. I'm just asking questions. If you can't handle that, maybe you're not as tough as all those characters you play. Janet Street Porter finally joined in, her distinctive voice cutting through the tension. Denise, I have to say, I think you're being unfair here. Tom has been perfectly polite, and you've been needling him since he sat down. What's this really about? Denise turned to Janet, her voice rising. What it's about, Janet, is that I'm tired of celebrities coming on this show and treating us like we're beneath them. He walks in here with his serious face and his one-word answers. And we're supposed to be grateful? Ruth tried once more to steer things back. Look, everyone, let's just take a breath here. Tom, I apologize for the direction this has taken. Would you like to tell us about working with your co-stars? But before Tom could respond, Denise launched into another attack. You know what I think, Tom? I think you're scared. I think underneath all that tough guy exterior, you're just insecure. That's why you won't talk about your real life. That's why you hide behind these dark, violent characters. You're compensating for something, aren't you? The words hung in the air like poison. The other panelists looked shocked. Ruth put her hand over her mouth. Colleen shook her head in disbelief. Janet stared at Denise with wide eyes. Tom stood up slowly, his face calm, but his eyes cold. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but firm. I came here today to talk about a film I'm proud of, a film that a lot of talented people worked very hard on. I was willing to discuss my craft, my process, and the story we're trying to tell. What I wasn't expecting was to be personally attacked by someone who clearly has some kind of agenda. I don't know what I did to offend you, Denise, but I won't sit here and be insulted. Denise laughed again, that same mocking laugh. Oh, here we go. The big man is upset. Can't take a little criticism? Tom shook his head. This isn't criticism, Denise. Criticism would be questioning my performance or my choices as an actor. What you're doing is trying to humiliate me on national television for reasons I can't even understand. And I'm not going to participate in that. Ruth stood up as well, reaching out towards Tom. Tom, please, don't go. This has gotten completely out of hand, and I apologize on behalf of all of us. Colleen nodded vigorously. Yes, please stay, Tom. We'd love to hear about the film. Denise is out of line, and we all know it. But Denise wasn't finished. Out of line? I'm the only one here with the courage to ask real questions. The rest of you are too busy fawning over him like he's royalty. Janet turned to Denise, her voice sharp. Denise, you need to stop. This isn't about courage. This is about basic respect, and you've shown none of it today. Tom looked at Ruth, then at Colleen and Janet. I appreciate that some of you have tried to keep this civil. I really do. But I think it's best if I leave now. Denise stood up now too, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Fine, run away, Tom. That's what you do best, isn't it? Run away and hide. Go back to your private little world where nobody can ask you anything difficult. Tom turned to face her one last time. You call this difficult? These aren't difficult questions, Denise. Difficult questions would be about the themes of the film, about the challenges of the role, about the message we're trying to convey. What you've been doing is just mean-spirited and unprofessional. And frankly, I feel sorry for you. The audience gasped. Denise's face turned red. You feel sorry for me? How dare you? I dare because it's true, Tom continued, his voice steady. You're sitting here trying to tear down someone you don't even know, someone who came here in good faith. That says a lot more about you than it does about me. Ruth stepped between them, her hands raised. Okay, that's enough. Tom, I am so sorry this happened. You have every right to leave, and I completely understand. Denise wasn't backing down. Don't apologize to him. Ruth, he's the one being difficult. He's the one who can't handle a simple conversation. Colleen turned to Denise, her voice shaking with anger. Denise, stop it. Just stop. You've embarrassed yourself. You've embarrassed this show, and you've treated our guest appallingly. This isn't what we do here. Janet added, She's right, Denise. This has been painful to watch. Tom has been nothing but respectful, and you've been attacking him from the moment he sat down. Denise looked around at her fellow panelists, realizing she'd lost them all, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. I can't believe you're all taking his side. He's an actor. He's used to being pampered and praised. Well, I'm not going to do that. Someone needs to hold these people accountable. Tom had already started walking towards the exit, but he paused and turned back one more time. Accountable for what, exactly? For choosing to keep my personal life private. For taking my work seriously. For not wanting to engage in gossip and speculation. If those are crimes, then I'm guilty. But I'm not going to apologize for having boundaries. The audience started applauding. It began slowly, with just a few people, but within seconds, most of the studio audience was clapping for Tom. Some even stood up. The sound filled the studio, drowning out whatever Denise was trying to say next. Denise looked stunned. She turned to the audience, then back to Tom, her face a mixture of shock and anger. Oh, of course you'd all side with him. The famous movie star. Never mind that I'm trying to do my job here. Ruth spoke up, her voice carrying authority now. Denise, your job is to interview guests, not to attack them. There's a difference between asking challenging questions and being hostile. Tom gave a small nod to Ruth, Colleen, and Janet. Thank you all for trying. I hope the rest of your show goes better than this. He looked at Denise one last time. And I genuinely do hope you figure out whatever it is that made you behave this way. Good luck with everything. With that, Tom Hardy walked off the set. The camera caught him disappearing through the studio door as the applause continued. The remaining panelists sat in awkward silence, with Denise looking defiant while Ruth, Colleen, and Janet looked mortified. Ruth turned to the camera, trying to salvage what was left of the segment. Well, that certainly wasn't how we planned for that interview to go. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back... But Denise interrupted one more time. I stand by everything I said. If he can't handle honest questions, he shouldn't be in the public eye. Janet shook her head slowly. Those weren't honest questions, Denise. They were personal attacks. There's a world of difference. Colleen added quietly. I've never been so uncomfortable during an interview. That was really hard to watch. The cameras cut to commercial, but the damage was done. In less than 10 minutes, what should have been a straightforward promotional interview had turned into a disaster. Tom Hardy, a guest who had come prepared to discuss his work professionally, had been subjected to a barrage of personal attacks and accusations. And through it all, he had maintained his dignity, setting clear boundaries and refusing to engage in the hostility being directed at him. The studio audience had seen it all unfold. They had watched as Denise Welch, for reasons known only to herself, had decided to turn a simple interview into a confrontation. They had seen her fellow panelists try repeatedly to redirect the conversation, only to be overruled by her determination to provoke and belittle. And they had watched as Tom Hardy, faced with unprecedented rudeness on what was supposed to be a friendly daytime talk show, had chosen to walk away rather than stoop to her level. The contrast between the two couldn't have been more stark. On one side, a host who seemed to believe that being aggressive and invasive was the same as being a tough interviewer. On the other, a guest who understood that having boundaries doesn't make you difficult. It makes you human. Ruth had tried her best to keep things civil. She had repeatedly attempted to steer the conversation back to safe territory, to give Tom the opportunity to discuss what he had actually come to discuss. Colleen and Janet had both spoken up against Denise's behavior, showing that they understood the line between tough questioning and outright hostility. But Denise had been unstoppable, seemingly determined to prove some kind of point, regardless of the cost to her guest's dignity or her show's reputation. What made the situation even more remarkable was Tom's restraint. He could have responded with anger. He could have been aggressive, or dismissive, or cruel. Instead, he remained calm, explained his position clearly, and ultimately made the decision that preserving his self-respect was more important than getting through the interview. His final words to Denise, expressing pity rather than anger, showed a level of maturity and emotional intelligence that stood in sharp contrast to her behavior. The audience's reaction said everything. Their applause wasn't just support for a celebrity. It was recognition that they had witnessed something unfair, something that crossed a line. They had seen a person being treated badly for no good reason, and they had voted with their hands, showing clearly who they believed was in the right. As the commercial break rolled, the studio was left in chaos. Producers were undoubtedly scrambling to figure out how to proceed. The other panelists sat in uncomfortable silence, processing what had just happened. And somewhere offset, Tom Hardy was probably taking a deep breath and wondering what on earth had just happened to what should have been a routine promotional appearance. The whole incident raised important questions about the nature of celebrity interviews and the responsibilities that come with hosting a talk show. There's a difference between asking difficult questions and being difficult. There's a difference between challenging a guest and attacking them. And there's definitely a difference between trying to get interesting answers and simply trying to humiliate someone on camera. Denise Welch had clearly come into the interview with some kind of preconception about Tom Hardy. Maybe she believed he was arrogant. Maybe she thought he needed to be taken down a peg. Maybe she was trying to create a viral moment. Whatever her motivation, she had misjudged badly. She had assumed that being aggressive would make for good television, but instead, she had created a situation where she came across as the villain and her guest as the victim. The irony was that if Denise had approached the interview with genuine curiosity and respect, she might have gotten the interesting, revealing conversation she seemed to want. Tom Hardy is known for giving thoughtful answers when he feels comfortable and respected. But by starting from a place of hostility, she guaranteed that she would get nothing but defensive responses and eventually, no responses at all. The other panelists had shown how it should be done. Ruth, Colleen, and Janet had all tried to create a space where a real conversation could happen. They had asked reasonable questions. They had shown respect, and when they saw things going wrong, they had tried to intervene. Their efforts hadn't been enough to save the interview, but they had at least shown that they understood the basic principles of how to treat a guest. For Tom Hardy, the experience must have been bewildering. He had likely done hundreds of interviews over the course of his career. He had probably faced tough questions before, questions about his past, his choices, his performances. But there's a way to ask those questions that respects the person you're talking to, and Denise had shown no interest in finding that way. Instead, she had gone straight for personal attacks, questioning his character, his motives, even his masculinity. The accusation that he was hiding something, that he was insecure, that he was compensating for something, these weren't questions. They were insults dressed up as journalism, and Tom had recognized them for what they were. His decision to leave wasn't about being unable to handle criticism. It was about refusing to participate in his own humiliation. The phrase Denise used, about Tom being scared and hiding, revealed more about her approach than anything else. She seemed to believe that privacy was the same as secrecy, that maintaining boundaries was the same as having something to hide. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of how healthy people operate. Having a private life isn't suspicious. It's normal. It's healthy. And for someone in the public eye, it's absolutely necessary. Tom's response to this was perfect. He didn't try to defend himself against baseless accusations. He didn't try to prove he wasn't insecure or scared. Instead, he simply pointed out that the accusations themselves were inappropriate. He reframed the conversation, making it clear that the problem wasn't his boundaries, but Denise's refusal to respect them. The moment when he said he felt sorry for her was particularly powerful. It shifted the dynamic completely. Instead of defending himself, he turned the focus back on her behavior and her motivations. It was a move that showed confidence and emotional intelligence. He wasn't trying to win an argument. He was simply stating a truth as he saw it, that someone who behaves that way towards a guest is someone dealing with their own issues. The studio audience understood this instinctively. That's why they applauded. They recognized that they were watching someone handle a difficult situation with grace and dignity. They saw someone who refused to be bullied, but who also refused to become a bully in response. It was a masterclass in maintaining composure under pressure. As Tom walked off that set, he left behind a mess of Denise's making. The other hosts would have to figure out how to continue the show. The producers would have to decide how to handle the situation. The audience would go home talking about what they had witnessed. And Denise would have to face the reality that her aggressive approach had backfired spectacularly. The lesson from this whole disaster was simple but important. Being a good interviewer isn't about being aggressive. It's not about trying to catch people out or make them uncomfortable. It's about creating a space where genuine conversation can happen. It's about asking questions that come from curiosity rather than hostility. And it's about understanding that every person, famous or not, deserves to be treated with basic human decency. Denise Welch had failed at all of these things. She had created an environment of hostility from the very beginning. Her questions weren't designed to elicit interesting answers, but to provoke and demean. And when her guest quite reasonably chose to remove himself from that environment, she tried to paint him as the problem, rather than acknowledging her own behavior. The contrast between Denise and her fellow panelists was stark throughout the entire interview. While Ruth, Colleen, and Janet tried to maintain professionalism and respect, Denise seemed determined to create conflict. While they attempted to redirect the conversation to safer ground, she kept pushing it back towards confrontation. While they apologized and tried to make their guest feel welcome, she doubled down on her attacks. Their responses during the interview showed real character. They could have stayed silent, going along with Denise to avoid conflict on camera. Instead, they spoke up, making it clear that they didn't agree with her approach. Ruth's repeated attempts to apologize, Colleen's gentle pushback, and Janet's direct criticism all showed that they understood what was happening was wrong. For viewers watching at home, the whole incident must have been uncomfortable and fascinating in equal measure. It's rare to see such naked hostility on a daytime talk show. These programs usually maintain at least a veneer of politeness, even when dealing with controversial topics or difficult guests. But this interview had stripped all that away, revealing the ugliness that can happen when one person decides that being provocative is more important than being fair. The audience in the studio had the best view of all. They could see the tension in real time, could watch the other panelists' reactions, could observe Tom Hardy's growing discomfort and eventual decision to leave. And they had made their feelings known through that applause, sending a clear message about who they believed was in the right. Tom Hardy's final words before leaving were particularly telling. He thanked the other hosts for their attempts to keep things civil. He wished them well for the rest of the show. And even to Denise, despite everything she had said, he expressed hope that she would figure out what had driven her behavior. There was no gloating, no anger, just a calm assertion of his right to be treated with respect. This kind of composure under pressure is rare. Most people, when faced with such sustained hostility, would either fight back aggressively or crumble. Tom did neither. He stated his boundaries clearly. He called out the behavior for what it was, and when it became clear that the situation wasn't going to improve, he simply removed himself from it. It was the response of someone who knows their own worth and doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. The whole incident served as a reminder of why so many celebrities are guarded in interviews. When someone can turn what should be a friendly promotional appearance into a personal attack with no warning and no justification, it's no wonder that people in the public eye are careful about what they say and to whom they say it. Tom Hardy's preference for privacy, which Denise had mocked so aggressively, suddenly seemed entirely reasonable. Denise's insistence, even after Tom left, that she stood by everything she said, showed a complete lack of self-awareness. She seemed genuinely unable to see that she had been the problem. In her mind, she had been doing tough journalism, asking the hard questions that others were too timid to ask. In reality, she had been bullying a guest who had done nothing to deserve such treatment. The other panelists' reactions after Tom left spoke volumes. Their criticism of Denise, their visible discomfort, their attempts to distance themselves from what had happened, all of this made it clear that they knew the interview had been a disaster. They understood that what they had just witnessed wasn't good television or brave journalism. It was simply someone being unnecessarily cruel to another person for no good reason. As the show cut to commercial and the immediate aftermath began to unfold, one thing was certain. This interview would be remembered, but not for the reasons Denise might have hoped. It wouldn't be remembered as a moment of brave questioning or tough journalism. It would be remembered as the time a talk show host was so aggressively hostile to a guest that he had no choice but to walk out. And it would be remembered as an example of how not to conduct an interview, a cautionary tale about what happens when someone confuses being provocative with being insightful. For Tom Hardy, walking off that set must have felt both necessary and regrettable. Necessary because staying would have meant continuing to subject himself to unprovoked attacks. Regrettable because he had come prepared to have a genuine conversation about his work, and that opportunity had been destroyed by someone else's agenda. But in making the choice to leave, he had shown that he valued his dignity more than airtime, and that's a lesson worth remembering. What made the entire situation even more striking was how quickly it had escalated. The interview had started with such promise. Tom had walked onto the set looking relaxed, ready to engage. The audience had been excited to see him, and then, within moments, the whole atmosphere had changed. Denise's opening question had set a tone of confrontation that never let up. The speed of the collapse was remarkable. One moment, there was a talk show interview. The next, there was a public confrontation. And through it all, Tom had maintained his composure, never raising his voice, never becoming aggressive, simply standing firm on his right to be treated with respect. The other panelists would likely remember this interview for a long time. They had tried their best to salvage it, to create moments where a real conversation could happen. But they had been overruled at every turn by Denise's determination to create conflict. And in the end, Tom Hardy had made the only choice that preserved his dignity. He had drawn a line. He had said, clearly and firmly, that he would not be treated that way. And he had followed through, walking away from a situation that had become untenable.